just stop for a second. Seriously, just pause and let the silence completely sink in. I want you to step with me into the absolute echoing stillness of an ancient Egyptian dungeon. You can almost hear it, right? The slow, agonizing drip of condensation sliding down these cold, unforgiving stone walls. Feel the heavy, damp, packed earth right beneath your feet. The air down here is thick, it's hard to breathe. Okay, so we're going to dive into this incredible narrative today, but we are going to do it with extreme, deliberate slowness. We're taking our time. We are not just looking back at some dusty history lesson. We are literally stepping right into a profound, epic, cinematic reality. The scripture records a tale that begins right here, in the absolute lowest, darkest abyss of an entire empire, a place that has been completely stripped of the sun. It's a story of divine architecture, but an architecture that was meticulously built in the pitch dark. And man, does this thought brilliantly capture the razor-thin line between absolute, unimaginable power and total destruction. Imagine the heavy, suffocating darkness pressing in on a young Hebrew slave named Joseph. The Bible reveals that he has been violently stripped of his freedom, betrayed by his own flesh and blood, completely falsely accused, and thrown into a pit that civilization basically forgot existed. Yet even in this suffocating dark, he's given a task. He has to serve two fallen political elites, the Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and the chief baker. These were men who, just days ago, walked on flawlessly polished marble floors. Now they're sitting in the dirt. Their insanely expensive fine clothes are just reduced to filthy rags. The contrast is just staggering. Part 1. The Forgotten Dungeon. Let's really zoom in closely right here. I want us to look at the micro-narrative, the raw, visceral details of life inside this forgotten place. Picture the actual grime deeply embedded in the dirt on Joseph's chained hands. Every time he brings these men a cup of water, you hear the harsh clank of heavy iron. The air isn't just thick with the literal stench of a subterranean prison, it's thick with the palpable, vibrating dread. The scripture reveals that one specific morning, Joseph walks in and immediately notices the trembling lips of the cupbearer and the baker. Look at their faces. They are ghostly pale, completely haunted by uninterpreted visions from the night before. They are men standing right on the edge of a cliff in the pitch dark, absolutely desperate for just a sliver of light. And notice the sheer, piercing empathy radiating from Joseph in this exact moment. Think about it. A hard and bitter prisoner would have just ignored their sorrow, completely consumed by his own tragic misery. But the scripture records that Joseph stopped. He physically stopped what he was doing. He looked at their fallen faces and asked why they were so sad. When they lamented that there was no one around to interpret their dreams, Joseph didn't offer some cheap parlor trick. He completely bypassed the renowned, highly educated magicians and astrologers of the Egyptian age. He simply looked at them and asked, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" In one single sentence, he takes the raw, terrifying power of revelation and places it entirely in the hands of the divine.
I want us to play back these exact interpretations in agonizing, frame-by-frame slow motion. Let's look at the cupbearer's mind first. He sees 3 vines. He watches them miraculously blossom right before his eyes. He sees the phantom sight of plump, heavy, purple grapes being crushed and squeezed directly into Pharaoh's gleaming golden cup. It's a vision of pure life, complete restoration. But then, it is brutally juxtaposed against the baker's fate. 3 baskets of white bread sitting on his head, Joseph's voice drops to a whisper. The interpretation he gives is cold, it's piercing, and it's utterly terrifying. The baker sees a vision of black wings violently beating against the sky, a swarm of birds descending to tear the very flesh from a doomed man's head. It's death, straight up.
So the timeline kicks in, and the violent precision of the scripture here becomes literally breathtaking. Day 1, the prophecy is spoken in the damp dark. Day 2, the agonizing, heavy silence of waiting, just listening to the water drip. Day 3, the dawn breaks. It happens to be Pharaoh's birthday. Suddenly, the massive, heavy iron doors of the dungeon groan and swing wide open. The blinding light pours in. The Bible records the exact, chilling fulfillment of the divine word. For the cupbearer, there is the beautiful, crystal clinking of royal wine glasses as he is fully pardoned and restored to his velvet robes. For the baker, there is the horrifying, fatal, whistling swing of the executioner's blade. Life and death delivered exactly, precisely as the divine word decreed.
Look at this number, 2 full years. I really need you to feel the excruciating, suffocating weight of this duration. Think about the cupbearer. He walked out of that dark hole. He breathed in the fresh, sweet air of the Nile,
and he completely, entirely forgot the young man who gave him his actual life back. He just moved on. The scripture reveals this was not some cosmic accident, though. It was a highly intentional divine pressure cooker. Every single day, for over 700 days, Joseph woke up to the exact same rough stone walls, the exact same rattling sound of his iron chains, the exact same deafening silence from heaven. It was the deepest, most crushing isolation imaginable, but it was meticulously, purposefully preparing his character for a coming national apocalypse.
Part 2. The Imperial Nightmare.
Let's completely shift the cinematic lighting in our minds right now. We are transitioning far away from the cold blue stone of that subterranean prison. Imagine a sweltering blood-red sunset setting over the magnificent, sprawling waters of the Nile. The camera pans all the way up, past the guards, into the highest royal chambers. The absolute most powerful man on earth, the Pharaoh, a man literally worshipped daily as a living, breathing god, bolts upright in his bed. He is drenched in a freezing cold sweat. His chest is heaving. The scripture records that his spirit was deeply, profoundly troubled. The imperial nightmare has officially begun. The Bible paints a picture here of grotesque, unnatural horror that completely defied all Egyptian logic and understanding. Pharaoh dreams of 7 beautiful, incredibly healthy, fat-fleshed cows grazing peacefully by the riverbank. But then, the water breaks. From the dark depths of the river emerge 7 utterly horrific, skeletal, gaunt cows. The scripture emphasizes just how remarkably ugly they are. Let's slow down this imagery. Imagine these monstrously thin, decaying beasts unnaturally unhinging their jaws to consume the healthy animals whole, bone-crushing bone. And the absolute most terrifying part? The Bible reveals that after devouring the fat cows, the gaunt ones did not gain a single solitary ounce of flesh. They remained just as starved, just as skeletal. They were a literal black hole of consumption.
And the nightmare doesn't stop. It compounds, building this massive, macro-level dread across the entire empire. Pharaoh falls back into a fitful sleep and sees 7 plump golden ears of grain, beautiful harvest, but then 7 incredibly thin ears, scorched completely black by a brutal, searing east wind, sprout up right next to them. We watch in horror as the withered, blackened, dead grain violently swallows the bountiful harvest whole. Then morning breaks, the sun comes up. The scripture says Pharaoh immediately summons the absolute brain trust of Egypt, every elite magician, every single wise man in the kingdom. He tells them these terrifying dreams, but the massive room just falls dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The entire intellectual might of the greatest empire on earth is utterly paralyzed with fear. Nobody has a clue.
Part 3. The Ritual of Transition.
And right here, we witness the sudden, almost violent awakening of memory. The cupbearer, standing nervously in that terrified, silent throne room, suddenly speaks up. "I remember my faults this day." It's an absolutely breathtaking butterfly effect, isn't it? A completely forgotten promise made in the damp, rotting dark of a dungeon abruptly yanks Joseph's fate right out of isolated tragedy, thrusting it directly into the white-hot epicenter of an imperial crisis. The entire machinery of the Egyptian empire dramatically shifts its focus from the heavens down to a Hebrew slave. Let's slow time down entirely here to focus on this micro-narrative. This is a literal ceremonial rebirth. The scripture records that they hastily brought him out of the dungeon, but you have to understand he cannot stand before a god-king covered in the filth of the earth. So listen to the harsh scraping sound of the bronze razor against his face and head, peeling away years of dirt, neglect, and trauma. See the pristine, crisp rustle of the snow-white linen fabric as it softly falls over his scarred shoulders. He is physically, tangibly shedding the stench of the dungeon. He is shedding his identity as a forgotten prisoner, actively preparing to step into the blinding historical light of the throne room.
Imagine the heavy, suffocating, intensely intimidating silence of this massive marble throne room, pillars reaching into the sky. Pharaoh looks down at this freshly shaven 30-year-old foreigner and says, "I have heard that you can understand a dream, to interpret it." Now this brilliantly illustrates Joseph's spirit. Think about it. He doesn't puff out his chest, he doesn't try to grasp for power or negotiate his freedom right then and there. The Bible records him standing before the living God of Egypt, radiating absolute, unshakable humility, and just saying, "It is not in me." He completely deflects the glory, he channels an undeniable higher authority, promising that the divine will give Pharaoh an answer of peace.
Part 4. The Strategy of Survival. Joseph decodes the absolute terror. The scripture reveals the dreams are actually one and the same.
7 years of unprecedented, explosive agricultural plenty, followed immediately by 7 years of a famine so agonizing, so devastating, it will literally erase the very memory of food from the face of the earth. But see, Joseph doesn't just deliver the terrifying prophecy, drop the mic, and step back. No. He instantly, seamlessly transitions from being a conduit of divine revelation into a brilliant, masterful statesman. He lays out a cold, highly logical, architectural blueprint for the actual survival of the known world. We have to ground this epic narrative in brutal, necessary mathematics. Joseph looks Pharaoh dead in the eye and mandates a massive, structural overhaul of the entire Egyptian economy. The scripture says he advises taking a strict 20% tax, 1/5 of all the harvests during the 7 plenteous years. That's a staggering amount of food. It is an utterly unprecedented centralization of power and resources. He proposes appointing strict overseers to stockpile grain in massive fortified silos until the gathered food is, exactly as the scripture describes it, like the sand of the sea, completely and utterly beyond human measure.
Part 5. The Viceroy's Wren.
You have to look at the sweeping, massive implications of this specific moment. The entire royal room is stunned. The Bible records a visceral, undeniable awe completely washing over the monarch's face. Pharaoh turns to his paralyzed, silent advisors and asks them, "Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" There's no debate. Pharaoh recognizes the unmistakable, undeniable divine architecture dwelling right within this man. The exact same slave who was violently thrown into a rocky pit to die in the desert is now universally recognized as the single only mind capable of holding the empire together. We really need to focus on the extreme macro details of this absolute power transfer. It all happens in mere seconds, but it carries the heavy weight of eternity. Feel the cold, heavy metal as Pharaoh physically slides his own royal signet ring onto a finger that, just a few hours ago, was scraping the damp dirt floors of a prison. Feel the weight of the massive solid gold chain as it drops with a heavy metallic thud against Joseph's chest, resting perfectly over those brand new royal garments of fine linen. The transfer of supreme absolute authority is complete, and it is immediate.
Now, let's execute a sweeping, cinematic pullback in your mind's eye. We are leaving the quiet, tense intensity of the marble throne room. We are bursting out into the blistering heat and blinding light of the Egyptian sun. Hear the deafening, roaring crowds of thousands. See the massive swirling clouds of dust kicked up by the pounding hooves of the horses as Joseph rides in the second chariot of the empire. The royal heralds are sprinting before him, their voices literally tearing through the hot air, screaming at the top of their lungs, "Bow the knee." And just like that, tens of thousands of people collapse into the dirt before the new ruler of Egypt. The grand reversal of destiny is absolutely complete.
But, amidst all this roaring triumph, the gold and the chariots, let's bring the camera back down to a very intimate, deeply philosophical close-up. The scripture records Joseph having 2 sons before those brutal years of famine even arrive. He names his firstborn Manasseh, which literally means God has made him forget all his toil and his father's house. And he names his secondborn Ephraim, meaning God has caused him to be fruitful in the land of his affliction. This is so incredibly profound. He immortalizes his deep trauma right in their names, openly acknowledging exactly how the divine forced him to bloom, forced him to thrive in the darkest, most unforgiving, toxic soil imaginable.
And then, the sky turns to solid brass. The rich earth hardens into cracked dust. The terrifying arrival of the promised devastation officially begins. The 7 years of plenty suddenly end and the famine violently strikes. The Bible reveals that the famine was literally over all the face of the earth. But in Egypt, because of the man who came from the dungeon, there was bread. Hear the deafening, echoing groan of the massive, heavy iron doors of the storehouses as they are finally, slowly pulled open, dust falling from the hinges. Under Joseph's strict command, Egypt instantly becomes the sole, pulsating heartbeat of life in a completely starving, dying world.
And so we find ourselves completely suspended on a razor-thin edge. Think about this reality. Joseph now holds newly acquired absolute omnipotence. He literally controls the very lifeblood of the entire world. And far away, miles and miles across the desert in the land of Canaan, the scripture reveals that the very brothers who threw him into a pit, the very men who heartlessly sold him into slavery, are running completely out of food. They are packing their rough bags. They are nervously heading toward Egypt. So I have to ask, when absolute power finally rests in the hands of the deeply betrayed, what exactly happens when the betrayers come begging for bread?